Welcome everybody to ZKast. I'm ZS Caravallo from ZK Research, and quick shout out to eWeek, my media partner. All ZKasts are done in conjunction with the eWeek eSpace program. I'm joined today with fellow Canadian Jon Arnold from J. Arnold and Associates. Jon, how are things there north of the border?
Hey, great to be here, ZS. And yeah, you know what? I'm looking out my window. It's actually been a pretty good day. The weather is warming up, and believe it or not, the tulips are shooting up through the ground. That's a good sign. But otherwise, coming back to Canada from Enterprise Connect last week, it's a little bit of a hassle with the travel. There's some good parallels we could talk about for securing your borders. Keeping the infected people out, but it's just it's same challenges these enterprise companies have with their networks, and that's a whole other podcast, by the way. Data security for sure. That's how I feel.
I do believe spring has sprung, and one of the big indicators of that is Enterprise Connect, because that's usually, is at the border of winter and spring. And so you and I both came back from there. It was the first Enterprise Connect, an in-person one that we had, and we missed two. So it was good to come back. And for a lot of people, this was their first in-person event after largely what was a 2-year hiatus. And so I know you and I have both been to a couple before that, but this, for a lot of people was their first. And so any initial thoughts? I thought the crowd was bigger than I thought it was going to be. I know a lot of companies still haven't released travel budget, and so that was pleasantly surprised. But were there any, just initial thoughts on the show itself?
Yeah, so first impression for sure. I mean, a lot of people were there putting their toes in the water, right? Not sure about events. And, companies like, 8x8 is a good example that decided they weren't going to travel, so they did their analyst event before. That's one way to do it. But there's no substitute for being there, the real thing. So, for people who were there for first time, I think they would have said, oh, big show, huge. Well, imagine how they're going to react when they go back next year when it's actually back to the size it normally is. I think as a litmus test, for coming back, I think it passed with flying colors. I think they did a great job. People were comfortable. The show floor looked, pretty big to me. I know it could be a lot bigger in the future, but traffic was strong. I do think, though, from what I heard from the exhibitors, that there weren't as many buyers, more partners there. But that's okay. I think the success of having it in person is huge for Informa, right? To establish, that the event is still viable. Because how many years can you go away from this being virtual and survive? So I think they're very relieved to see it was a good enough turnout, right?
It was a hybrid format, so they had a lot of the sessions streamed. 4 days in the Biodome. I actually felt like I didn't really miss a beat. Once the session started, I felt like it was just like business as usual, which was good to see. From your standpoint, were there any kind of overarching themes that you thought stood out?
Well, I think, everyone is going right away, hybrid work, and for you and me, it's like, oh yeah, that's so yesterday, but it's so new for a lot of people. And considering hybrid work didn't even exist the last time we were at Enterprise Connect, it's understandable that this is all that everybody wanted to talk about. And if there's anything that's clear to me is that no one really knows how this is going to go. I think everyone is trying different things. And I think this was a great forum for people to kind of try ideas out and share experiences for better or worse.
Yeah, I actually did the keynote panel, kind of a fireside chat with Rob Scott as part of their UC summit, right? It was a couple of months ago. And one of the comments that I made, which you got a chuckle out of, was that I thought the first wave of hybrid work would be a disaster for companies, because you're right, nobody really knows what they're doing. We're kind of feeling our way through this. And I think one of the things that kind of came out in a lot of discussions I had with the vendors there is that hybrid work is fundamentally different than remote work, right? It's easy. The old remote work model that we had, where you had a handful of knowledge workers that were kind of software power users, could VPN in and work remotely. And then you had everybody else in the office. Today, in a hybrid work environment, you've got people like contact center agents and inside salespeople, people that have never worked remotely before. They're going to do this through perpetuity, but then you got to somehow blend that with the in-office experience. And so I thought, that was a kind of pervasive theme there. It was the theme of all the keynotes, and I wonder, was there any aspect of any of the keynotes that stood out for you?
Not really, and I think this is a takeaway for folks like you and me who are kind of in the know with all this. Not a lot groundbreaking or new that we haven't already heard, and I think that's because we get spoiled by having all these announcements done ahead of time in the briefings before the show. So I didn't really hear a lot that we hadn't already gotten wind of before.
Yeah.
But for the broader audience, sure, the keynotes were about, okay, the big players are still the big players. But no bombshells, like Amazon Connect when they announced a few years ago. That really was a disruptor for our space. Like, where did this come from? And that's a quiet lead up, I think, to HP and Poly, Zayas, which I want to say a few things about. But over to you.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I thought, the Microsoft keynote was the Microsoft keynote. They largely just do product demos as part of their keynotes now. I liked Gary Sorrentino's keynote from Zoom. I thought he actually did a real keynote where he didn't talk any product. He just talked about kind of the future of work and what that looks like. And I thought one of the bigger missed opportunities, I told Javed Khan and Snora Jesper from Cisco this, wasn't the Cisco keynote because hybrid work is different. I think to me, you need to almost rethink hot desking. I think people historically haven't liked hot desking. And if you remember in the demos they were doing, when Snora plugged his laptop into the Desk Pro, the Desk Pro lit up, right? It had his whole calendar there. It had all his information, and he did that with one cable into a MacBook, and that became his own kind of personal workspace. And I knew it was there. I'm sure you knew it was there because we get pre-briefed on all this stuff. But for the average person in the audience, they kind of flew by that. And I think one of the most interesting things to look for over the next little while is how people's concepts of what hot desking is changes. And I think we should get rid of the term hot desking and come up with something new called flex working or something like that. But I know Cisco had a lot to cram into their keynote. But I thought they could have left out some of maybe the calling contact center stuff, which I'm sure they were trying to establish some credibility. But that to me was one of the more interesting aspects of the keynote that went by in a blink of an eye.
Yeah, because Cisco's got their fingers in so many pies in this space.
Yeah,
it's way too much ground to cover in one session. I'm with you on this. For hybrid work to work, because it's so fluid back and forth, and kind of the workers seem to be in the driver's seat. We got to be happy if you want us to go. The way I look at it is, for return to office to work, it's got to be a better experience. Otherwise, why would I leave my home, right? So the tools and the toys have got to be there, like you say, that hot desking capability. Yeah, but give it a sexier name. I mean, at least now I think we're kind of past the pandemic issues that keep people at home and not coming back to office. But one of the interesting things I've heard is with return to office, since hybrid is such a big theme here, is that we've been so hardwired to sit behind our screens at home all day on these video calls. When people go into the office, they stay on their screens all day, and they're doing what they do at home. So what's the point of going into the office? So, it's not like you build it and they will come. I mean, you've got to give them a good reasons to be there. And I know the social element is a big part of it now. And, I just think that rethink of what hybrid work is about is technology's got a role to play, but it's so much more than just the toys.
Scott Wharton from Logitech and I were talking about that, how, like, if you think of a traditional conference room, you've got one camera at the end of it, right? But if you think of going to like a sporting event, you don't have just one camera televising the whole sporting event. You got them all over the place. You can see different views and different angles and get a good idea of the dynamics of the game, right? And so in theory, why couldn't you do that in a conference room and outfit it with a bunch of cameras and allow people to kind of change their view based on, who's talking or whatever, right?
Yeah, and that plays to how Cisco is a good example of a company. Just every briefing we get, there's more features and more features and more features to make it. I'm glad you brought up the sports things, Zayas, because I'm sure you'd agree with me that the sports experience, watching a game at home on TV, is actually a better experience than being in the stadium, right? Yeah. And so they're smart. They figured that out. And I think you could make the office environment. I wrote a piece about this years ago about what enterprises could learn from sports, because the way they do it is so good, and the enterprise workplace experience probably needs to start looking more like that, especially because digital workers now, they're gamers at heart. It's a different mentality that they have and the things they'll respond to.
Yeah. And all right, now from an announcement perspective, normally we get lots of press releases at Enterprise Connect. There wasn't the same volume that there normally is, and I think because a lot of the vendors weren't really sure, what to expect from an audience perspective. But the most notable one, I think, was probably Google partnering with UJet for Contact Center. And do you have any initial thoughts on that?
Well, I guess why, right? I know Google, like Amazon, they get what they want. And, it's like no skin to them lost. If they enter a market and doesn't stick, they'll move on to something else. They don't need to be in this market. And they've already got everybody in their pocket with CCAI. So I don't really see the upside unless, as you were saying earlier, well, it's additive. If the customers want to add Contact Center to Workspace, they can have it. Okay, and then that could be another nail in the coffin for the rest of the competition, but that's, they'll do what they want, right?
Well, yeah, my thought on it, first of all, was I thought if Google was really serious, they'd have bought UJet. I do think UJet's a good product. I think they are one of the few truly cloud native contact center companies. So Google could have bought them and rolled them in pretty easily. I think I've kind of lost faith in Google, though, in their ability to really become a major enterprise collaboration player. And I think they do okay in the SMB space. And if they want to attach UJet to that, that's fine. But I don't think this catapults them into large enterprise at all. I think from the years 2007 to 2012 or 13 or whatever, one of my no jitter predictions every year was that Google would become a more serious, enterprise player. And the year would come and go. And, in the words of Michael Scott, right? Strike, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, strike three, I think is what he said. So it just, I think this is, again, Google's, they're dipping their toe in the waters. They're seeing what happens. Maybe they do wind up acquiring them down the road or something. The other thing I heard people speculate was this was some way that Google would use their CCAI install base to be able to backdoor into accounts, and they'd steal the contact center business from the CCAI partners. But to me, that would be like suicide. I mean, every partner would just, if they did that once, every partner would drop CCAI and go work with AWS.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there's no upside to that. But I also think, bigger picture, because we see all this stuff. This to me is another example of the fallout and the price that eventually Zoom has got to pay for their failure to acquire Five9. It's for the life of me, I don't understand how they botched that. It was the wrong approach to do it. But by not getting it, it really does. It emboldens the Googles of the world to say, hey, Zoom doesn't have it, so that's an opening for us. I know Zoom is coming in with their own contact center, but they're even further behind where Google is.
yeah, well, I think long term, actually, I think that's a better play for them. I think it's funny because when deals fall apart, normally you talk to the company and there's a lot of people that are upset about it. Nobody at Zoom really seems to be all that upset about it. And I think the channels are the same. It's how you package them, right? From between UC and CC. And so I think at the end of the day, Zoom might get a product that fits their install base better by building it than trying to buy Five9 and work it in. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, and it's not too late.
Yeah, no, it's not too late. Anyway, so you had brought up HP Poly, and that wasn't really part of Enterprise Connect, but it happened right after it, which is funny because Poly spent a bunch of time with the analysts telling them all the great things that they're going to do as a company, and now they're part of HP. So did you have any, when you saw that, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I gotta say kudos to both companies for different reasons. Poly for being so well behaved last week, not tipping their hand. I mean, how do you do this? Knowing they've been acquired, maybe it hadn't quite been sealed at that point, but to not lead us along, but to give us, as you said, all the updates and the demos and the swag, blah, blah, blah.
Maybe we're trying
And
to get rid of the swag because the HP logo's coming.
yeah, so wait a minute, that's gonna more collector's items,
Yeah.
and so okay, that's fine, but but still, it's probably a good exit for them. And HP, kudos for the timing. To me, they could have pulled a Tom Brady and announced it before Enterprise Connect and taken all the attention away, focusing on them. They could have done that, but I respect them for waiting, right, and let the event pass. But really, I think for most of us, that was totally out of the blue, right? I mean, HP is not a company you would ever expect to see at Enterprise Connect. Next year, they're probably going to be one of the lead sponsors.
Yeah. Yeah. When I first saw it, I first thought it was HPE, right? The enterprise side.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, that kind of fits a little, right? Because then they could turn it more into a service model, attach it to the SD-WAN stuff that they're doing. And then I looked a little closer and I saw it was HP, HPI, right? And that's the group at HP that largely sells printers and PCs. And then you think, well, how does this fit into it? And I read Irwin's post and he was pretty bullish on it, but I don't share the same view. I get the concept that from a hybrid work perspective, you're going to sell headsets and cameras and stuff like that in, but you could have just partnered with Poly for that. Most of Poly's revenue still comes from the high-end conference room stuff, and that's not something that Poly plays in. I mean, that HP plays in. In fact, when somebody within HP Inc. said to me, most of the high value stuff went with HPE, we just kept all the plastic, right? And so the PC printer business, very low margin, right? And Poly premium price vendor. And so from a culture perspective, those two companies couldn't be more different. And so I don't know, I think from a Poly perspective, it was a great move for the shareholders because it wasn't really clear that shareholder value was going to come any other way but an acquisition. But I'm not fully convinced this is great for the Poly customers. I think if anything, you wind up seeing the Poly portfolio transition more to the low end line than the high end line where they've been in the past. So
yeah, that could well be. It reminds me a little bit about when Mitel was playing the consolidator role a few years ago, right? Buying up Toshiba and all the remaining handset vendors to own that space. And now I think they're saddled with it. But HP now becomes, I guess, the leading endpoint device player. And I think of it as a little bit like, well, if they want to give Microsoft a run for their money, Microsoft has great brand value as a consumer company. So does HP. Their endpoints are, top of I think their laptops are as good as anybody's. Their printers are the gold standard. So in a sense, they could try to play that premium play, but I agree, the margins aren't there like they are for the phones. But I think it makes a nice, easy sell for the channels. It's just more hardware and endpoints for them, so they like that. But is that a great business opportunity? I'm not sure. I always thought
they took on They also took on 1.7 billion in debt too, right? So
yeah,
that was a pretty big pill to swallow. Yeah. So perhaps pretty soon my HP printer will have a video screen on it.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Do you think there's a play there for HPE to be part of this to make it an end-to-end managed service solution?
Maybe, but those two are very separate companies now. So
yeah.
So
that's
yeah.
Well,
yeah. Anyway, so we'll see what they do with it. I do think that Poly struggled with some of the supply chain issues and stuff going on now. That is one area of strength for HP. They understand supply chain and logistics, and so I think there are some short-term benefits to gain. I think there's some. HP runs a pretty tight ship operationally, so there's some benefits there. It's just the long term I question, but maybe from a Poly perspective, again, from a shareholder, that was a great exit for them. So
yeah, Poly Packard. That's the new name.
Poly Packard. That's right.
Poly Packard.
All right, John. Anyways, so I think both of us are in agreement. It was a good show. It was good to start seeing people again. Not a ton of news from there, but enough to kind of make it noteworthy. And I think the value you got from the interactions with people, that itself made the trip worth it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Totally agree on that one, Zayas. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that wraps us up. If you're watching this, don't forget to click subscribe. And on behalf of Jon Arnold, my good Canadian friend, thanks for joining me, John. And I'll see everybody else next time on ZKast.